Here's part one written in simple, natural English. The tone is meant to feel human, warm, and engaging, without any harsh language or anything that might violate YouTube guidelines. No restricted names are used. The evening began like any other grand event hosted at the mansion on the hill, a place where expensive cars lined the driveway and soft music drifted through the open doors. People dressed in shining clothes stood in small groups, holding glasses and laughing as if they had never known worry or sadness. The chandeliers sparkled above them, and the marble floors reflected every step they took. Everything inside the mansion looked like it had been arranged to show wealth and importance. But that night, something different was about to happen, something no one expected. Earlier that day, a quiet young man had passed by the entrance of the mansion. He was not dressed like the guests. His clothes were simple, worn from time, and he walked with the kind of silence that made him easy to overlook. He had not planned to enter the mansion, but as he walked past, the sound of a piano drifting from inside caught his attention. It was a familiar sound, one that felt like a soft hand pulling him toward a memory he had put away long ago. He paused near the door, listening. He did not know anyone inside. He had no invitation. But something in that sound touched a part of him he had learned to keep quiet. When one of the staff opened the door to carry in more trays, the young man stepped aside. The staff member gave him a quick glance, a kind of look people give when they are too busy to care. The door stayed open for a moment longer, and the young man simply walked inside as though he belonged there. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. The mansion was crowded enough that a single unfamiliar face went unnoticed. Inside, he kept close to the wall, trying not to draw attention. His eyes moved from the guests to the decorations, but they always returned to the grand piano placed in the center of the main hall. It was a beautiful instrument with a glossy black surface that reflected the lights above it. A soft tune was being played by a hired performer, but the young man knew instantly that the piano could sound better, so much better. He felt an old ache rise in his chest. For years he had stayed away from pianos, even though they had once been his whole world. He thought he was done with music. He thought music was done with him. But hearing that melody brought everything back. He took one slow breath and tried to step back toward the door, thinking it was better to leave before anyone noticed him. But fate had another plan. Just then, the host of the evening, the millionaire, walked into the hall. He was a loud man with a voice that always tried to fill the room. People turned when he spoke. People laughed when he made jokes, even when the jokes weren't very funny. He enjoyed attention the way a child enjoys candy. He scanned the crowd and noticed the young man standing alone near the piano. The millionaire squinted, trying to place the face. When he could not, he smiled in a way that carried more arrogance than kindness. "Well now," he said loudly, stepping closer. "Who do we have here?" Some guests turned their heads. Others pretended not to listen, but leaned slightly toward the conversation. The young man stood still. He was not afraid, but he also did not want to cause trouble. "I'm just listening," he said softly. "Listening?" The millionaire laughed, drawing more attention. "To the music?" "Yes." The millionaire looked him up and down, noticing the worn shoes and the simple jacket. "You like music, do you?" he asked. The young man nodded. "Well then," the millionaire said loudly enough for the guests nearby to hear, "why don't you show us what you can do? Go on, play that piano." "I dare you." A few guests smiled, thinking it was all a joke. Others whispered quietly, assuming the young man would decline and hurry out. They thought the millionaire was simply teasing, enjoying the moment. The young man glanced at the piano again. His heart started beating faster. He had not touched a piano in years, not since life had pushed him into survival mode. But something about the millionaire's tone, the challenge, the mockery lit a small flame of courage inside him. I didn't come here to play, he said gently. I just wanted to listen for a moment. Oh, come on now, the millionaire said, laughing loudly. It's just a little music. Surely anyone can tap a few keys. He turned to the guests and added, Let's see what our mystery guest can do. The room grew quieter. More eyes turned toward them. The hired pianist stepped aside, unsure if he should intervene. The young man felt the weight of all those eyes. He never liked crowds. He never liked being in the center. But the piano was right there, and for the first time in a long while, his fingers longed to touch the keys. He took a slow step forward. The millionaire raised his eyebrows, surprised he had actually accepted the challenge. Go on, he said. If you can play even a simple tune, I'll be impressed. The young man didn't respond. Instead, he walked to the piano and rested his hand gently on the polished surface. It felt familiar. It felt like touching an old memory. But he didn't sit down, not yet. He kept his eyes on the keys, feeling a rush of emotions mixed with fear and longing. Behind him, people whispered, Who is he? Do you think he can actually play? He doesn't look like a musician. Maybe he wandered in from outside. The young man heard every word, but he kept his focus on the piano. He took another breath, remembering the tiny apartment where he learned to play as a child, remembering the evenings when his mother would sit beside him, encouraging him even when life outside their door was difficult. He heard the millionaire speak again, his tone sharp with impatience. Well, are you going to play something or just stare at it? The young man slowly looked up. Are you sure you want me to? He asked. The millionaire chuckled. What's wrong? Afraid? He shook his head. No, I'm just asking. Guests exchanged glances. Some were amused. Some expected a disaster. A few could sense something deeper in the young man's calm voice, something they couldn't quite name. Finally, he pulled out the bench and sat down. His hands hovered above the keys, but did not touch them. Not yet. The crowd waited. The millionaire smirked, and the young man closed his eyes. In that moment, the room seemed to shrink. The noise faded. All he could hear was the echo of the past, the laughter, the lessons, the hardship, the melodies lost to years of silence. He opened his eyes again. Slowly, his fingers lowered toward the keys. And just when he was about to play the first note, the room held its breath, not knowing that the very moment was the beginning of a story none of them would ever forget. Here is part 2, written in simple, natural, human-sounding English. It continues the story smoothly, while keeping the tone calm, engaging, and safe for all audiences. The room was silent, waiting for him to press the first key. People who had been talking only moments before now stood still, holding their breath as if something important was about to happen. But instead of playing, he lifted his hands from the keyboard and let them rest in his lap. His eyes stayed on the piano, but his thoughts drifted somewhere far away. Most of the guests didn't notice the change in his expression, but a few sensed something strange. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look unsure. He looked like someone remembering a part of himself he had tried to bury. Whispers began again. Maybe he forgot how to play. Maybe he lied. Maybe he's just scared. But he wasn't scared. What held him back was something deeper, something private. Behind him, the millionaire tapped his shoe impatiently on the floor. He didn't like waiting, especially not for someone he assumed was beneath him. Well? The millionaire said, trying to sound amused, but unable to hide his irritation. You wanted to sit there. Now show us what made you so interested in this piano. The young man finally looked up, meeting the millionaire's eyes for a brief moment. The look he gave wasn't angry or threatened. It was calm. Too calm. Before I play, he said softly, I want to listen. The millionaire frowned. Listen to what? He turned his head slightly and listened to the soft hum of the room, the murmur of distant conversations, the delicate echo of the piano strings, still vibrating from the last player. The room, he whispered. The people. The moment. The millionaire looked confused. Some guests exchanged puzzled glances. A few rolled their eyes, but one older woman standing nearby tilted her head, studying him with more curiosity than judgment. She had attended enough gatherings to know when someone carried a story inside them. The young man touched the keys again lightly this time, not enough to play a note, but enough to feel the cool surface. His fingers traced across the keys slowly, almost tenderly. It looked like he was greeting an old friend. A man standing near the back couldn't help whispering, "Why is he touching it like that?" Another replied, "Maybe he really knows what he's doing." Meanwhile, the millionaire chuckled loudly. "Come on," he said. "It's just a piano, not a long-lost treasure." But the young man didn't respond. Instead, his eyes settled on a tiny scratch near the right side of the piano, so small most people wouldn't even see it. But he noticed everything. His fingertips paused on the spot, and a bittersweet smile appeared on his face. That smile made the guests even more curious. The millionaire crossed his arms. "Are you planning to play tonight? Or should we get you a guide? Maybe you need someone to show you where the keys are." Some people laughed politely, but their laughter felt forced. More and more of them were beginning to feel that the millionaire was pushing too hard. The young man finally sat properly on the bench, straightening his back. He rested both hands on the keys, ready to play, but then stopped again. This time the pause wasn't awkward. It was thoughtful. He took a slow breath. "I used to know a piano like this," he said softly. Almost too quiet for the guests to hear. A few people leaned closer. "My mother taught me on one just like it," he continued. "She told me that every piano had a soul, that every key held a memory." The room softened. Even the millionaire's expression loosened a little, though he tried to hide it. She said a piano only sounded beautiful when the person playing it respected the story it carried. His voice didn't shake, but something in it felt fragile. One of the guests whispered, "He speaks like someone who really lived through something." Another nodded slowly. Maybe that's why he walked in. The music pulled him, but the millionaire wasn't convinced. He laughed again, louder this time. "So let me get this straight," he said. "You came here to listen to memories? To talk about souls? My friend, this isn't a fairy tale. It's a party, and we're waiting for you to play." A few guests shot him a disapproving glance, but he didn't notice. He was too focused on maintaining control. The young man didn't seem bothered. He simply looked down at the keys. Then, in a quiet voice, he asked, "If I play, will you listen?" The question surprised everyone. It wasn't defiant. It wasn't dramatic. It was sincere. The millionaire raised a brow. "Of course. That's the point." The young man nodded slowly. "Then promise me one thing." The millionaire smirked. "A promise? From me? This better be good." "Just listen," he said again. "Not judge. Not compare. Just listen." The millionaire waved a hand as though swatting away a fly. "Fine, fine. Just play already." The young man stared at the keys. This time he didn't hesitate. He placed his right hand gently on the middle of the keyboard and let the tips of his fingers rest on the smooth, cold surface. A single moment of stillness passed, and then a small cough broke the silence. It came from a man standing close by, who didn't mean to interrupt, but had accidentally done so. The sound snapped the room's concentration, and the young man's face shifted slightly, as if shaken out of a memory. He lifted his hands again, closing his eyes. Some guests sighed. Others whispered impatiently. The millionaire muttered, "At this rate, We'll be here until sunrise." But when the young man opened his eyes, something had changed in them. The softness was still there, but now there was a quiet strength like someone who had finally decided to stop running from his own past. He looked around the room slowly. He saw the guests in their expensive clothes, holding drinks and wearing polite smiles. He saw the millionaire waiting with a smug look. He saw the pianist who had been playing earlier, now standing off to the side with a curious expression. And for a moment, he felt out of place again. He didn't belong in this shining hall. He didn't belong among people who measured worth by wealth. He didn't belong in a world where music was treated like background noise. But the piano was the one thing he belonged to. He rested his hands on the keys, again, not trembling, not hesitant, just ready. Before he could begin, the older woman who had been watching him stepped closer. Her voice was gentle as she spoke. "You don't have to prove anything," she said. "Just play what your heart remembers." Her words settled softly into the room. The young man nodded, grateful for the kindness. The millionaire rolled his eyes, but said nothing. The young man breathed again slowly, deeply, and let his fingers curve naturally over the keys, the way they had years ago. This time, he didn't pause. He pressed one key, just one. A single note floated into the air, soft but clear, like the beginning of a story. The guests froze. The millionaire straightened. Even the lights seemed to glow a little warmer. It was only one note, yet it carried emotion they couldn't explain. But he didn't rush to play the next one. He stayed with that sound, letting it echo through the room like a breath from the past. People sensed it now. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a trick. Something real was about to happen. He placed his left hand on the piano as well, ready to join the melody. Another breath, another moment, and just when he was finally about to play, the music that lived inside him, someone near the doorway stepped inside the hall, calling out loudly, interrupting everything, and pulling the room sharply back into noise. A gasp spread through the guests. The young man's fingers froze mid-air. The moment shattered. And the room turned toward the unexpected voice, unaware that they had come within a heartbeat of hearing something extraordinary. Here is part 3, written in simple, natural English. It continues the story smoothly, keeping everything human and emotional without breaking any YouTube rules. The voice that burst into the hall came from a man who looked like he had been searching for someone. He wore a neat jacket and held a clipboard, and his eyes scanned the room as if he had rushed in without thinking about the commotion he was causing. "I'm so sorry," he said loudly, slightly out of breath. "The lights in the back hallway just went out, and we need the host to take a look right away." The millionaire groaned loudly, annoyed at the interruption, annoyed at being needed, annoyed at everything that wasn't focused on him. "Really? Right now?" he snapped. The man nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. It could affect the power in the main hall if we don't fix it soon." The millionaire muttered something under his breath, but he didn't argue further. He liked showing power, but he liked control even more. Something going wrong in his event irritated him more than anything else. "Fine," he said sharply. "I'll come check." He turned to the guests and forced a smile. "Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. And you," he pointed at the young man at the piano, "don't run away. We're not done here." The young man simply nodded. The millionaire strode out of the hall with the staff member following behind him. The guests relaxed a little, and the tension that had built up slowly began to settle. Without the millionaire standing over him, the young man felt the heavy pressure ease from his shoulders. But the magic of the moment had definitely been broken. Some guests sighed, disappointed. "I thought he was finally going to play. That one note was beautiful. Maybe when the host comes back, he'll continue." The young man lifted his hands from the keys, letting them fall gently into his lap again. He stared at the piano for a few moments, trying to steady his thoughts. He didn't blame the man who interrupted. Things like this happened, but a tiny part of him wondered if this was a sign, another reason not to play. Another nudge from life, telling him to keep his music hidden. The older woman who had spoken kindly to him earlier stepped forward once again. "I'm sorry about the interruption," she said softly. "You looked ready." He gave her a small smile. "Maybe it's better this way." "You don't really believe that," she replied gently. He glanced away. "I don't know what I believe anymore." She studied him for a moment, then said, "When someone holds a gift inside them, the world will always try to interrupt. But the music is still there. It waits for you." Her words touched him more than he expected. He didn't respond right away. He just sat quietly, feeling her words settle inside him. Meanwhile, the other guests slowly returned to their conversations. Some drifted toward the food tables, while others discussed the strange scene that had just happened. A few kept glancing toward the piano, hoping he would still play, but he remained seated, hands still, mind drifting back to a time he rarely let himself revisit, a time when music had meant everything. A time before life had changed all at once. He could almost see it, the small apartment, the old wooden stool, the worn keys of the piano he used to practice on every evening after school. His mother would sit beside him, humming softly to guide him through the melodies. Her voice had always carried warmth, even on the hardest days. He remembered how she believed in his talent more than anyone else. She would whisper, "One day people will hear you, truly hear you." For a long time, he believed it too. Then everything changed. Life forced him into situations he never wanted. After losing her, the piano became too painful to touch. Every note reminded him of what he no longer had. So he walked away from music, thinking he could live without it. But the truth was, he had only buried it deep inside. Tonight, walking past the mansion, hearing the faint sound of piano keys, had awakened something he thought he'd locked away forever. He rubbed his thumb gently along the edge of the piano. The smooth surface brought back memories that made his chest tighten. The hired pianist approached him quietly. He had been standing on the side, watching everything with interest and respect. "You play," the pianist said softly. The young man looked up. "I used to." The pianist nodded. "Then you still do." "Music doesn't leave the heart." The young man looked down again. "I'm not sure I can anymore." The pianist smiled kindly. "The way you touch the keys says otherwise." He didn't know what to say. Compliments always made him a little uncomfortable. The pianist rested a hand on the piano and said, "If you want to play, forget the crowd. Forget the pressure. Play for yourself." The young man swallowed, his thoughts swirling. "I don't know if I'm ready." "You don't have to be ready," the pianist said. "You just have to begin." With that, he stepped back and returned to the edge of the room. The young man sat quietly, staring at the white and black keys. He didn't lift his hands. Instead, he thought about all the times life had pushed him away from music, times when he worked long hours at jobs that drained him, times when he had to choose survival over passion, times when he heard music on the street and walked the other way so he wouldn't fall apart in front of strangers. He wondered what his mother would say if she saw him now, sitting in front of this grand piano, hesitant, unsure, afraid of opening a part of himself he hadn't touched in years. He imagined her smile, her hand on his shoulder. "Play," she would whisper. "Not for them, for yourself." He closed his eyes and let the memory wash over him. When he opened them again, the older woman was still nearby, watching him with patient eyes. "What happened to your music?" she asked gently, not judging, just curious. He hesitated before answering. Life happened. She nodded slowly. Life always happens. But gifts like yours don't disappear. They wait. He lowered his gaze. It's been a long time. Then let tonight be the moment you return to it, she said. He opened his mouth to respond. But before he could say anything, a group of younger guests approached. Drawn to the piano like moths to light, one of them asked jokingly, So, are you the mystery talent of the evening, or what? Another added, We saw how everyone stopped talking when you touched that key. You sure you don't play professionally? He shook his head. I'm not a professional. Could have fooled us, the first one said. Their tone was light, friendly, not mocking like the Millionaire's earlier words. They genuinely seemed interested, but attention still made him feel uneasy. I used to play, he said. Used to? One of them asked. Why'd you stop? The question hit a little harder than he expected. His throat tightened. The older woman stepped in smoothly, sensing his discomfort. Sometimes life puts music on pause, she said. But pauses aren't endings. The young guests nodded thoughtfully. Will you play when the host comes back? One of them asked. The young man looked at the keys, then at the doorway where the millionaire had disappeared. I don't know, he admitted. They didn't pressure him. They simply smiled and walked away, chatting among themselves. The room slowly began to buzz again with conversations. But there was a new energy in the air. People were no longer dismissive of him. They were curious. They wanted to understand who he was and what story lived behind that quiet face. He stood up from the bench to stretch his legs. The piano stool had felt both comforting and heavy at the same time. Standing gave him a moment to breathe. He walked a few steps, away from the piano, but didn't go far. He kept it in sight, like someone who didn't want to lose something precious again. He wandered toward the tall windows overlooking the garden. The cool night air slipped through the open glass, brushing against his skin. It felt refreshing, calming. He watched the soft lights in the garden, glowing like stars caught on branches. He took a long breath. Behind him, the guests continued to move, talk, eat, and laugh. But his mind was in another world, a world made of music, memories, and unanswered questions. He closed his eyes for a moment and listened not to the guests or the clinking of glasses, but to his own heartbeat. Slow, steady, familiar. When he opened his eyes again, he looked back at the piano. He wasn't sure if he was ready to play when the millionaire returned. But he knew one thing. For the first time in years, he wanted to. The night after the rooftop event stayed fresh in everyone's mind. But for the young man who had shocked the entire crowd with his playing, the hours that followed were strangely quiet. He went home with his thoughts swirling inside him, unable to sleep. There was a mix of joy, disbelief, and a strange worry he couldn't explain. He knew something had changed that night, but he wasn't sure if the world was going to welcome that change or push back against it. The millionaire, on the other hand, barely slept either. His thoughts kept running in circles. He had spent most of his life controlling rooms, controlling people, controlling outcomes. But last night, everything slipped out of his hands. He didn't know the young man, hadn't even cared to ask his name, and yet that unknown stranger managed to silence an entire rooftop full of guests with nothing but emotion in his music. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Morning arrived slowly. The city woke up to its usual noises, cars rushing by, people hurrying to work, vendors cracking open their stalls, but for both the millionaire and the young man, the day felt different. The young man stepped out into the street, carrying a small bag with his few belongings. He had never been much of a talker, and he preferred keeping his thoughts to himself. But today, his mind felt heavier than usual. The song he played last night replayed in his head again and again. He didn't understand why the millionaire reacted so strangely. First he mocked him, then he stared at him with something almost like fear. He walked slowly through the city, unsure where he needed to go. He didn't have a big dream or a plan. All he had was a love for music and a feeling that maybe, just maybe, he had stepped into a world he didn't fully belong to. Meanwhile, the millionaire was pacing around his office, trying to focus on his work. Papers were scattered across his desk, and his assistant kept bringing him folders to sign. But he hardly noticed any of them. His mind kept going back to that moment, the moment when the young man's fingers touched the keys, when the notes rose into the air and wrapped around the entire rooftop like warm light. It was as if the whole city paused to listen. He didn't like being surprised. Not in business, not in life, and especially not in public. His pride had taken a hit, and the more he tried to ignore the feeling, the stronger it grew. At noon, he canceled all his meetings. His assistant was confused, maybe even a little worried, but he didn't bother explaining. He just needed space to think. He sat by the window and watched people on the street, regular people, moving through their day without knowing how much one simple moment of music had shaken him. He didn't know why he couldn't stop thinking about the young man. Maybe it was because he had finally met someone he couldn't predict. Maybe it was because the music felt painfully honest, something he hadn't heard in years. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in his life, he felt like the one being judged. Just then, his phone buzzed. It was a message from one of his event staff. People are talking about last night. A lot. The millionaire exhaled slowly. He knew this was coming. He was used to attention, even headlines, but this felt different. The story wasn't about him. It was about the unknown young man, whose music softened even the coldest parts of the night. The staff member sent another message. Someone recorded a little clip of him playing. It's already spreading. He froze. He didn't like things happening without his control. And if a recording of that moment was spreading, then the world was going to start asking questions. Who was the young man? Where did he come from? Why had he been at the event? He felt a strange mix of jealousy and curiosity twisting inside him. He wanted answers, too. Across the city, the young man walked into a small cafe, hoping to sit quietly for a while. He ordered a tea and took a seat near the window. While waiting, he noticed a group of people nearby watching something on their phone. They were smiling, replaying the same clip over and over. He didn't need to hear the sound to know what it was. His hands tightened slightly around his cup. He had never asked for attention. He didn't play for applause, didn't play for fame. He played because it was the only place in the world where he felt whole. The cafe door opened, letting in a gust of cool air, and a woman hurried inside. She held her phone tightly and looked excited as she walked to her friends. "You have to see this," she said, breathless. "This guy played at some fancy rooftop event last night. They say he wasn't even invited." The young man lowered his gaze. Her friends leaned in. "No way," one whispered. "Listen to this part. It sounds like, I don't know, like he's telling a story without words." "That's the crazy part," the woman said. "He doesn't even look like someone who belongs in that place. But when he plays, everyone stops." The young man's heart pounded. He didn't want to draw attention, especially not the kind that might follow him around. His life was simple, quiet, and he liked it that way. He stood up, left some coins on the table, and quietly slipped out. The afternoon sun hit his face as he stepped outside. He breathed deeply and walked away from the cafe, hoping that the world would forget about the video as quickly as it found it. But it didn't, single quotes T, not within hours. The clip spread across the city like a spark in dry grass. People shared it not because of where it happened, but because of what they felt. The music touched something gentle, something honest. And soon, the story of the unknown pianist became bigger than either the young man or the millionaire expected. Later that evening, the millionaire decided he needed to find him. He sent messages to everyone on his staff. Find out who he is. He didn't care how long it took. He needed answers. Maybe he needed closure. Or maybe he just needed to know how someone with nothing could make him feel. Something he hadn't felt in years. As the night grew darker, the young man walked toward the old community center where he sometimes volunteered to play. The building was quiet, its windows glowing faintly from inside. He pushed the door open and stepped in. The warm air greeted him like an old friend. Inside, a few children were still hanging around after their music practice. When they saw him, they brightened. "You're here," one of them said excitedly. He smiled a little. They always made him feel at home. One of the kids ran up to him. "Can you play something for us today?" He nodded gently. He walked to the old piano in the corner, the one with chipped paint and worn keys. He sat down slowly, letting his fingers rest on the keys. This piano didn't shine like the one on the rooftop. It wasn't polished or grand, but it held memories, and that mattered more to him than anything. He began to play. The music flowed soft and warm, filling the small room with a kindness that wrapped around every heart there. The children listened quietly. Some swayed. Some closed their eyes. To him, this was enough. This small room, these small moments, this was where music felt real. But outside, the world was already searching for him. And sooner or later, they would find him. The millionaire sat alone in his office, staring at the city lights through the large window. He wasn't used to waiting, but tonight he had no choice. He whispered to himself, almost unwillingly. How did he do it? The unanswered question drifted into the quiet room. The young man finished playing at the community center. The kids clapped softly, their faces glowing with joy. He smiled again. A small and genuine smile. He had no idea that the night ahead was about to change everything, because by morning, the millionaire's search would lead him straight here. And the young man's quiet world was about to collide with a world far louder than he ever wanted. The next morning arrived with soft sunlight spreading gently across the streets, but it didn't feel gentle for the young man at all. He woke up early, long before the city fully stirred, because something in his heart felt restless. He didn't understand why. He only knew that the world outside felt a little louder than before, as if it was calling him towards something he had never asked for. He stepped outside and walked slowly toward the community center, wanting a quiet place to think. His steps were calm, unhurried, but his thoughts moved like a river running too fast. He knew the video had spread. He had seen it. And even though the clip was short, it carried a piece of his heart. He wasn't sure he was ready to share with everyone. He walked past people chatting on the sidewalk, past children heading to school, past shopkeepers lifting metal shutters with sleepy faces. No one recognized him. Not yet. But he knew the peace wouldn't last long. Something big was moving toward him, and all he could do was hope he could stay true to himself when it arrived not far across the city. The millionaire was in a very different state of mind. He had barely slept, his mind stuck in a loop of questions he couldn't shake off. He kept replaying the rooftop moment again and again, trying to understand why that young man's music felt like it cut through him. He wasn't used to feeling exposed. He wasn't used to feeling small. But last night had shifted something inside him, something he didn't know how to name. His team had been searching all night, sending messages, calling people, asking around. The video had spread fast, but people still didn't know who the pianist was. He had slipped away before guests fully recovered from the shock, and no one had seen where he went. But the millionaire wasn't the type to give up easily. By mid-morning, he received a message from one of his assistants. I think we found something. A few kids recognized him from a community center. The millionaire stared at the message for a long moment. A community center. He didn't know what to expect. He only knew he had to see the young man again, if not to apologize. Then at least to understand. He grabbed his coat and left the building without saying a word. Meanwhile, at the community center, the young man walked in quietly. A few kids were already there, practicing on small keyboards or humming simple tunes. When they saw him, they brightened immediately. "You're early today," one of the kids said with a grin. He smiled softly and nodded. "Just wanted to check in." They surrounded him, excited and full of energy. They didn't care about videos or headlines. To them, he was the gentle person who taught them how to play simple melodies, who listened patiently, who believed in them even when they hit the wrong notes. One girl tugged at his sleeve. "Can you play something before class starts?" He hesitated for a moment, but then he nodded. He walked over to the old piano in the corner, the same one he had played the night before. The room was quiet, except for the soft chatter of children settling down. He placed his fingers on the keys and took a slow breath. Didn't want fame. He didn't want attention. He just wanted a place where music felt safe. As he began to play, the children fell silent. The notes were warm and gentle, like a soft blanket wrapped around the room. The melody wasn't complicated. It didn't try to impress anyone. It was simply honest. But while he played, the doors at the front of the community center opened. A staff member looked up. Standing, there was the millionaire. He didn't enter with loud footsteps or sharp words. For the first time in a long time, he looked unsure of himself. He stood quietly, watching the young man play. The music stopped slowly as the young man lifted his hands from the keys. The children turned toward the door. Confused but curious, the young man's heart sank a little. He had hoped for more time before the world found him. The millionaire took a slow step inside. "I need to talk to you," he said. The room fell completely silent. The young man didn't respond immediately. He simply stood up from the piano and faced the millionaire with calm eyes. He wasn't angry. He wasn't scared. Maybe just tired. The staff member spoke gently. "Sir, maybe step outside? The kids have their practice." The millionaire nodded slowly and stepped back. Waiting just outside the door, the young man gave the children a reassuring smile before following him. Outside, the morning air felt a little too sharp, too bright. They stood facing each other in the small courtyard. The millionaire took a breath. "I owe you an apology." The young man didn't say anything. He waited. "I shouldn't have mocked you," the millionaire continued. "I judged you without knowing anything about you. Last night, I misread everything." Still, the young man stayed silent. The millionaire looked down for a moment, something he rarely did. "But when you played, I don't have words for what I felt." The young man finally spoke softly. "It wasn't meant for you. It wasn't meant for anyone. It's just something I do." "I know," the millionaire said. "Maybe that's what stunned me the most." There was a long pause. Cars passed by in the distance. A few birds chirped on the roof. Then the millionaire said something unexpected. "I want to help you." The young man looked at him with confusion. "Help me?" "Yes," the millionaire said, his voice steady now. "You have something rare, something real, and I've spent years surrounded by people who play for attention, not emotion." "I don't want fame," the young man said quietly. "I know," the millionaire replied, "and I won't force that on you. But what if I could help you keep doing what you love without losing yourself?" The young man looked away for a moment, unsure. The millionaire continued, "I can fund this community center. I can fix the instruments. I can support the programs here. You already do so much for these kids. Imagine what you could do with better tools." The young man blinked slowly. He had never thought about that. He didn't play for money. He didn't teach for recognition. But the kids meant something to him, something deep. What do you want in return? The young man asked carefully. The millionaire exhaled. Nothing, just, let me be part of something real for once. The young man studied him for a long moment. He saw no arrogance today, no pride, just honesty. Finally, he nodded slightly. We can talk, he said. For the first time since the rooftop event, the millionaire smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It wasn't proud or powerful. It was simply human. For the rest of the afternoon, they sat inside the community center office and talked about ideas, how to improve the place, how to help the kids, how to make sure the young man could keep doing what he loved. There were no cameras, no audience, just two people trying to understand each other. By evening, things felt different. The millionaire looked calmer, almost lighter. The young man felt a strange sense of relief, like a heavy door had finally been opened. They walked out of the building together. One of the kids ran up, waving excitedly. Are you coming back tomorrow? The young man smiled. Of course. The millionaire watched the exchange with quiet admiration. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in soft colors. The city lights slowly flickered on, glowing like a warm blanket over the streets. Before leaving, the millionaire said softly, I wasn't expecting to feel this, but thank you. The young man nodded. For what? For reminding me of something I forgot a long time ago. The young man didn't ask what that meant. Some things didn't need explanation. They parted ways, both carrying something new inside them. But neither of them knew that the story wasn't over, because while they talked quietly in the community center, the video continued to spread across the city. Then beyond it. By the next morning, the whole world would be looking for the unknown pianist, and everything was about to change once again. The next morning rose with a strange kind of brightness, a kind that didn't feel natural to the young man. Normally, mornings were quiet for him. He liked slow walks, soft sunlight, and the peaceful feeling of a new day beginning. But this morning felt different. Even before he stepped outside, he sensed a change in the air, like the world had suddenly started paying attention to him, the one thing he had never wanted. He stood by the small window of his room, watching people move about in the street below. They looked normal, busy with their day, unaware of how much his life was shifting with each passing minute. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the uneasiness inside him. He didn't know yet just how far the video had spread. He didn't know that people beyond the city, people in other countries, even had seen the clip of him playing on the rooftop. He didn't know that blogs, news pages, and music channels were sharing it with captions like, "The unknown pianist who played from his soul." But he would find out soon enough. He walked out into the morning air, hoping the day would be calm. He headed toward the community center, the one place where he always felt grounded. That small building, with its cracked walls and faded paint, had become a home to him in a way nothing else had. Children waved when they saw him approaching. "You're early again." One of them shouted happily. He smiled and waved back, trying to push away the uncomfortable feelings swirling inside him. Inside, the center was buzzing more than usual. Two staff members were whispering to each other, glancing at their phones. One of them looked up as he walked in, her eyes widening just a little, almost like she had seen a ghost. "You? You've seen the news, right?" she asked gently. He froze. "News?" He repeated. She nodded slowly, hesitant. "About you." Before he could respond, she held out her phone. There it was. His video, millions of views. Thousands. Not tens of thousands. Millions. He felt his stomach drop. The title on one of the posts read, "Mystery Pianist Stuns Elite Rooftop Crowd. Who is he?" His hands grew cold as he scrolled. People from everywhere were talking about him, analyzing his playing, praising the emotion in his music. Some were searching for his identity, trying to compare his face to old photos of young talent from different cities. He felt a heaviness in his chest. This wasn't what he wanted. He looked up at the staff member. I don't know what to do." She gave him a sympathetic smile. "You don't have to do anything right now. Just breathe." He nodded, but breathing suddenly felt difficult. Meanwhile, far across town, the millionaire sat in his office, staring at the same video, but unlike the young man. He wasn't shocked, that he was worried. He knew what fame could do. He knew how fast people could twist stories, how quickly the world could lift someone up, only to pull them down again. He knew how attention could become a weight too heavy for anyone to carry. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. "This is too fast," he muttered. He didn't want the young man to be swallowed by chaos, not after seeing how honest he was, how gentle, how unchanged by the world's noise. He grabbed his phone and immediately called his driver. "Take me to the community center, now." When he arrived, the children were in class and the hallways were quiet except for faint music echoing from one of the rooms. He walked slowly, respectfully, not wanting to frighten anyone. He found the young man standing alone in a small room, staring blankly at a poster on the wall. He didn't even hear the millionaire enter. "You saw it," the millionaire said quietly. The young man turned, his expression filled with something between fear and confusion. "Yes," he whispered. The millionaire stepped closer. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize the video would spread this fast." The young man shook his head. "It's not your fault." "Maybe not," the millionaire replied, "but I don't want this to crush you." The young man looked down, his voice barely a breath. "I don't know what to do. I never asked for this. I never wanted people searching for me." "I know," the millionaire said softly. "You don't have to be anything you don't want to be." "But they want answers," the young man said. "Everyone expects something now." "Then we give them the truth," the millionaire said. "Not some dramatic story. Not a brand. Just you." The young man sighed. "I don't know if I'm ready." "No one ever is," the millionaire admitted. "But you're not alone." "Not anymore." The young man looked up. There was honesty in the millionaire's voice, not a single trace of ego or mockery. It was almost surprising how human he seemed today. "Let's go somewhere quieter," the millionaire said. "Let's talk." They walked out of the center and sat on a bench nearby under a tree. People passed by, but no one recognized the young man yet. The world might have known his music, but his face was still mostly a mystery. The millionaire spoke gently. "You can decide how much of your story to share. You can choose what you want your future to look like." The young man listened quietly, absorbing every word. "You don't owe the world anything," the millionaire continued. "They felt something from your music, that's a gift. But it doesn't mean you have to give them your whole life." The young man looked at him thoughtfully. "What would you do? If you were me?" The millionaire paused. "I would take it one step at a time. Not rush, not hide. Somewhere in between. I would speak once, clearly, so the world knows the truth. And then I would live my life the way I choose." The young man nodded slowly, and the millionaire smiled softly. "And remember something. Your music touched people not because you tried to impress them, but because you were honest. Don't lose that." For the first time that day, the young man's shoulders relaxed a little. They talked for a long while about life, music, fear, choices, and what mattered most. It was strange, the young man realized. The millionaire who once mocked him now sounded like someone who understood him better than most hours passed before they stood again. The millionaire gave him a reassuring look. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you. Not because of your talent, but because you're a good person. The young man felt something warm inside him. Thank you, he whispered. That evening, after a long day of thinking, he returned to the community center. The kids were still there, laughing and chasing each other around. When they saw him, they ran toward him with excitement. Will you play something? One child asked. He looked at their bright eyes, their trust, their innocence. This was what mattered. He nodded softly. He sat at the old piano once again, placing his fingers gently on the keys. The children gathered around, leaning forward with eager smiles. He began to play. The melody was simple, warm, full of hope. It wasn't meant for the world. It wasn't meant to go viral. It wasn't meant to be analyzed or praised. It was meant for this room, for these kids, for himself. And while he played, he realized something. He didn't have to fear the world. He didn't have to hide from it. Either. He could choose his own path. When he finished, the room filled with soft applause and laughter. Just then, his phone buzzed. A message. It was from the Millionaire. Whenever you're ready, I'll arrange everything. Only what you're comfortable with. The young man smiled genuinely this time. He typed back, tomorrow. The next day, they held a small gathering at the community center. Not a press conference, not a grand event, just a simple space with a few local reporters and community members. The Millionaire stood silently in the back, letting the young man take the lead. He spoke gently, honestly, telling them who he was. Not a star, not a prodigy, just a person who loved music. He explained that the rooftop moment was never meant to be grand. It was simply a moment of emotion. People listened with respect. And then he played. Not to impress, not to prove. Anything. Just to share. When the last note faded, the room felt full and peaceful. Later, as the crowd dispersed, the Millionaire walked over to him. You did well, he said softly. The young man smiled. I just told the truth. And that, the Millionaire replied, is more powerful than anything else. They stepped outside together. The evening breeze brushing gently past them. The world would still talk, still share the video, still wonder about him. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He had music. He had peace. He had the freedom to choose. And as they walked down the quiet street, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. His life had changed, but somehow it still belonged to him. And that was enough.